Hello, my name is Andre Veskimeister, and you are watching another episode of Lockersfirst video podcast. And today I'm extremely honored to have James Doyle as a guest of our show. James, how are you doing today?
Yeah, I'm doing good, and we're not that far behind Halloween, so forgive the spooky lighting. But in this recording studio today, I'm looking a bit ghostly. But hopefully, it will be a good podcast, and hopefully, you can hear me fine for this.
Absolutely, absolutely. But for the start, let's start with an interesting story because for me, you are related to M&M and especially brown M&M chocolate. So, what is the story behind the M&M and you? Could you tell us, please?
Sure. Okay. And firstly, thanks as well, Andre. So it's a real treat to be able to talk about this. The brown M&Ms seems to have been quite interesting for a few people, yourself included. So I think if I just tell you the story quickly, again, you've heard it, and then and then we'll see if it still resonates. Um, so brown M&Ms. So many years ago, I learned an operational concept um, in a previous role, and I noticed in the operations when you're doing operations improvement that actually, if you had one thing that was right, absolutely right, if you could get this one thing right, everything before it had to be correct, and everything after it also had to be correct. And I was trying to find a way to link this to something we'd all understand. And I discovered a story. Now, we in England, we call stories like this urban legends. I don't know what they're called around the world. Maybe a fairy tale. But this urban legend was about the 1980s American rock group called Van Halen. And Van Halen had, and I just want to caveat, I don't know if this is true or not, but I just like it. And if it is true, great. If there's a real truth underneath, then fine. But this story works regardless of whether it's true or not. Van
I can
Halen,
just sorry, I can confirm this is a true story.
this is true.
Find it out.
I was too scared to fact check it because I thought it was so good that if I fact checked it, it would be wrong. But it's worked really well. So the concept of brown M&Ms was Van Halen had the world's biggest drum kit. They did this huge world tour, and they're good guys, and they wanted to take their show to as many people in North America as possible. So they booked all these venues, and these venues were not used to having a band as big as Van Halen. So Van Halen were very personally involved in this, and they wanted the crowd to have a not only a safe experience, but they wanted to feel like their full show, like it was in the big stadium, even if it was just a small venue. So they created a contract, and buried within this contract that went to the venue was a single clause. And this clause said that in the changing rooms, there should be a fruit bowl or a punch bowl filled to the brim, level to the brim, with M&Ms, but with all the brown M&Ms had to be taken out. So what would happen is the band would then arrive on the night, and they would walk into the changing room, and if the fruit bowl was there and it was level to the brim and all the M&Ms had been picked out, they'd have a look, then they knew the show was good to go on. But if the fruit bowl wasn't there, or if it wasn't full to the brim, or if there were brown M&Ms, then the band wouldn't perform. And the idea there is that the kind of thinking that means that someone would pay enough attention to a contract to actually have someone pick out M&Ms from a fruit bowl, something that seems silly, but if they thought if they paid that much attention to detail, then everything else in the venue would be right, which means the show would be perfect. So again, we come back to that concept that the brown M&M is the one thing that if you get it right, everything before it had to be correct, which means everything after it will also be good. And the way that we translate this into the world of supply chain today, if I look at my world, we're looking at supply chain as everything from financing and producing something somewhere in the world to placing it into a consumer's hands, and all the movements through logistics and distribution and customs and manufacturing and all those motions. And ultimately, if you can actually put, and the brown M&M here would be someone receiving something in the right condition at the right time. And if you can do that, that is a brown M&M in itself. Then that means the customers had what they want. The experience was positive. Therefore, their feelings afterwards will be positive, and they're more likely to buy again. But we do see these in our life in many ways, at work and at home. So, and I'm sure people will have their own stories, and I'm fairly sure you've got your own versions of brown M&Ms now as well, Andre.
Absolutely. This is too good story to describe the quality control performance without actually having quality control in place at all. So but I really find the story fascinating, and I shared it also with other people, and it's a quite moving story for a lot of other people. So thank you, James.
Oh, it's good. No, it's great. I mean, look, there are actually really big companies. I won't say the brand because you never know, but there's a really big media company that's known for making cartoons. They have theme parks that are in America. And actually, one of their measures is smiles. How many people leave their theme parks smiling? And they know that that's a brown M&M. So that dictates everything they do in the park, even from changing light bulbs on the signs when you enter, to how people behave and how people interact. So that brown M&M, are people smiling when they leave their park? Then that to them means that they've had a good experience, which means they're going to go away and tell other people they had a good experience.
Absolutely. And but now going to you as a person who tells interesting stories and have experience in different fields. I know that you have actually aviation background, and now you are full scale supply chain advocate or consultant and advisor. What is your story? How did you end up from planes or aviation to the supply chain?
So it's a good question. I'm always a bit shy to tell this. For a guy who speaks on stage a lot, it's a little bit. My story is actually, I try and keep it as short as I can. But I actually started life with aspirations in the aviation industry, and I actually started off in aviation. Got very heavily involved in that, and then had to switch careers. The industry had changed a lot after the early part of the 2000s, and that meant I had to move into logistics. So I actually had a career in logistics for a while, which meant I understood distribution, final mile, cross-border, and that was quite interesting. And then gradually I moved away from logistics and into supply chain. So I started looking at the problems and how the world worked. I want to say problems, but actually the challenges and the solutions that were needed to keep things flowing. We then had the advent of e-commerce, which, I think some of us can clearly remember this, circa 2010. And then I moved properly away from logistics. I gradually moved out of the distribution side into the supply chain, and eventually I worked for a very big retailer. And we were looking at their e-commerce supply chain before moving back into aviation, where I went and spent time in the Middle East looking after the commercial function for the world's largest international airline at the time. And all of that gave me this wonderful view in my career of being able to look at what was happening around the world, about how people were manufacturing, but what consumers were doing. And not just, I think everyone wants to talk about e-commerce, but, we're not a world that lives on data. We are a world that lives on food and clothes and material items. And I was very interested in the flow of goods, the flow of data, and the flow of money around that. So gradually this broadened out into more of a global trade understanding. And during my time in the Middle East, I looked at what was happening with the world particularly around trade development, emerging markets. We know that now, because of a number of trade policies, that things are slowing down a lot in the Far East, in particular China, and that even though that consumer demand was suppressed, actually we still know that we need to eat. And we need to grow produce in some countries, and manufacturing supply chains will change. So really what I do these days is I spend a lot of my time looking at what's happening around the world and advising clients on the right or the best. I say the right. No one can ever say they're right or they're wrong, but hopefully demystifying the world of global trade and helping them realign their supply chains to match a future that is a lot more resilient, but also B, where you can start to use the supply chain to differentiate your business. And these are good strategies that help some companies reduce their working capital, move goods a little quicker, meet consumer or business demands quicker. There's a whole bunch of things that come with this, but it is fascinating work. And it does mean that I get to look at everything from policy, regulation, airlines, population movements, finance, raw materials, but basically what is happening in the world. And look, one of the key things with all this, Andre, which I really always want to express, is I feel that in my world, it could be very doom and gloom. There's a lot happening in the world today that is very sad. And we've got to work around that as best we possibly can for the good of everyone. So I do see a lot of opportunity in the world where we can actually make things a little fairer with supply chains. We can move work to fair trading companies and countries. And the one thing that I do believe in all of this is that actually there are rules to everything we do. We create laws and international trade treaties and etc. And we should all follow those, whether we agree with them or not. So I personally believe that if you're going to play the game, you will play by the rules. It's as simple as that. So what we do is give people strategies that look for opportunities, de-risk, but also make sure that we're all playing by the rules fairly. And what you end up with are models which are sustainable, not just ecologically sustainable and good for the planet, but financially and also commercially. I mean, really, like the lifeblood of any business can then continue to grow. You can say the lifeblood of any business. A business can continue to grow, and can set itself up nicely for the future.
Agree with that. And for me, let's say last 5 years maybe have been quite an interesting what happened around the supply chain. Let's say after the pandemic or during the pandemic, I was saying that supply chain is broken. Now we have different conflicts that sort of are local, but not so local anymore. They are affecting the whole world. For example, the food industry is affected on that. What is your view on the last 5 years? How this supply chain has been evolved? Is it not broken anymore? Is it fixed? Or it's constantly moving and looking for a new equilibrium?
I actually think that's a really good point. So a lot of people try and answer this question and start the answer with, well, the trouble is, or the problem is. And actually, realistically, I don't think supply chains were ever actually truly broken. They were doing what they were meant to do, which was pick up stuff from around the world and take it to where it needed to be. It might not have been very fair, and it might not have been as efficient, and it might have been bad for the planet. But at the time, we were making the best decisions with what we understood, right? If we look over the past 5 years, I think a few big things have changed. I think the first thing is that it has actually put the reality of what we all need to function as a global society. And remember, this is a world that is built on globalization and is pretty much led by consumer-driven nations. So United States, for example, 80% of their economy is based on the consumer. So knowing how we actually work and what we need to live, I think that the bits which could be perceived as broken aren't, they're just changing. So, for example, I've noticed that there is a lot of emphasis on software and tech and development, and that's great, but actually pretty big teams. And the point comes is, when will you stop building something and start doing something? There still needs to be a physical movement of goods. So I think it begins to feel broken if it doesn't work the way that you expect it to. And my biggest concern right now, if we are going to say our supply chain's broken, it really only looks broken if you're trying to repeat what was happening in 2019. So to go back to 2019 prices, 2019 trade expectations, and I hear it all the time. Everyone's going cheaper, 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 quicker, quicker, quicker. It's just not there. Forget it. But also in 2019, we were seeing huge pockets of cash tied up in stock that wasn't available for sale. And that was both industrial and consumer-led. If we look at things now and how supply chains are realigning, regardless of what's happening politically in the world, everyone who has an international supply chain needs to de-risk that, which means spreading your sourcing, which means having alternative routes, which means keeping your goods and materials flowing. Equally, how can we make those shorter? Not necessarily in terms of distance, but in terms of the number of stages. So actually right now, while it appears quite bleak and bad, what we're actually experiencing is a change. And supply chains, like I say, are only broken if they're perceived to be broken. The smart companies, and we're beginning to see this a lot now, particularly with buyers based in Europe, the UK, and the USA, are now looking at nearshoring. And there's another term as well, which is a bit sad to use, which is friendshoring. And that means they're looking to manufacture goods closer to home with shorter supply chains. But then there's a whole heap of benefits that come from that. I'll give you one example of where we're seeing things which will improve soon. Is we talk about the semiconductor supply chain, microprocessors and chips. Now, there's some core materials that are needed for that, and they're actually found in the ground in South America, particularly Chile, Peru, Argentina. And previously they would have been sent off to other countries, processed, returned, and eventually make their way back into consumer markets in the USA. Now, it would take a lot to actually move that processing from those nations closer to where they are coming out of the ground. But the question is, why not? It is entirely possible now. Fabrication plants are becoming cheaper. There's actually a number of microprocessor fabrication plants currently being opened in North America. And while it's not today, it's coming. And there's laws and policies which are supporting that, such as the CHIPS Act in North America. Equally, we've just seen in the past few days Javier Milei, who is a libertarian economist, win the presidential election in Argentina. They have inflation above 140%, and he wants to remove the peso and replace the Argentine peso with the US dollar. He's also aligning himself to Western interests, whilst also he's got a challenge in terms of making sure that he balances the needs and his position, or Argentina's position, within other Latin American countries. Now, right or wrong, however that ends up changing, the point is it's changing. And Argentina is one of the world's largest countries by landmass. They've got some absolutely fabulous people. Lovely. It's a really nice place, and I'd encourage everyone to go there. They have some really good ideas, but they also have lots of crops, lots of good things that they can be doing, lots of minerals, and they can be trading those directly with the consuming nations, but equally they can be buying from those nations. So to me, when we get back to that, right back at the beginning of this, are supply chains broken? Only if you think they are. But actually, if your supply chain is creaking and you're trying to redo what you were doing in 2019, your total business strategy may still be right, but your supply chain strategy could be off. So how do we actually use this changing world to help these companies differentiate and realize the supply chain isn't broken? It just needs to realign itself to the new world.
I think you are right on that. Most probably, supply chain is all the time evolving, and there is no equilibrium at all. But going to your story now, you told about Latin America. I know that your history is related to Middle East and partly Asia, and now you are looking for Latin America. Can I say that you think that those are the markets that are going to grow the most in upcoming years?
Yeah, absolutely. And look, there's no hiding it with me. I'm very buoyant and positive on Latin America, but I also think there's growth in other regions. So if I look at Africa, I think has some phenomenal opportunities. And we're seeing new ports and new infrastructure development there. Particularly Port Lagos. And when you actually look at these shipping routes, they're across the Atlantic and coming into Europe and North America. So I think Africa's quite important. I think the same about the Levant. So this would be countries, Jordan, around that sort of Middle East area, North Middle East. And also some other parts of Asia that we haven't previously looked at or have really been big participators in the global arenas. Malaysia, Thailand, there's a lot coming out of Vietnam. And this is about, it's not just about trade wars and politics, but this is about, spreading risk and really, we could say sharing opportunity, but that's what's happening. On Latin America specifically, the reason why I'm particularly focused on that right now is the geography of the countries there is very, very important. Especially when you look at Mexico, Panama, and then when you come down a bit further south, but you realize that Mexico's got some great opportunities for manufacturing and growing. But to actually cross Mexico by land is a bit difficult because they've got some pretty mountainous terrain in the middle. But then you actually have the shipping, sea freight. And if you come down that Pacific coast side of Latin America, you've got over 60 major ports in Chile alone. And they provide fish exports, which of course can travel up to North America, but they can also cross through the Panama Canal. There's some problems in Panama as well. We know with water levels, and the canal's very busy right now. But you can also be driving across land. So I'm looking at what's really going on across the whole of Latin America. Why is that important to establish markets in Europe, the UK, and the USA? And what will that growth look like over the coming years? I'm very much seeing major hubs will be developed, and these will be cities that we haven't previously really thought about or might have been a little unknown to Europe. I think, and I'll give you one example here, is in Colombia, we all know that the capital is Bogota, and it's a very busy airport, one of the busiest actually in the whole of Latin America, but it's in the middle of the country. It's quite a distance away from the oceans. But we also have Cali over on the Pacific coast, but then we also have Cartagena up on I think it's technically the Caribbean Sea, but it's right there on the north. And that could be a big cargo airport, a big seaport. And if there's development going to happen over the next 5 to 10 years, it's very likely to be there because they can sail to Galveston, they can sail to Port Everglades, can cross the Atlantic to Europe quite simply and easily from there. So I think there's a whole load of things that are happening there as well. I wouldn't want to write off any other country around the world, but I just think right now, with the needs that we've got and the way that the world is shaping up in terms of trade agreements, that actually South America has a lot of potential that will be realized over the coming 3 to 5 years.
You mentioned these environmental issues and Panama Canal. Exactly. I just recently saw. I was visiting actually Peru a few years back, and one of the favorite places, Titicaca
Yeah.
Lake, is actually without water almost. So it's really heartbroken to see. So the environment is really changing, and this is one thing. Also, supply chain has to be adapt or improve in order to help the environment. So some words about the environment and supply chains. How do you see this item as a general? There's a lot of programs. Every company tries to be sort of sustainable and tries to improve. But do you see, is it enough? How much of that is sort of not in a bad way, but still PR talks and nice stories, and how much the environment is improving due to everybody's efforts?
I think in the emerging markets, and certainly in how we're choosing to buy in the established consumer markets, we're beginning to see some significant changes. I feel, and this is my view, I do feel that there is a lot of effort now going in, and it's not fair really to pick on some industries and saying that they're lying and that they're greenwashing, because ultimately it all comes down to doing the right thing, and at the same time as well the economics. Now, what I am definitely seeing in how we buy, it is becoming a lot more conscious. I particularly think around food. If you actually look at the price of goods and price of produce, it's not great at the moment, but and actually people will always go to where they can afford food, which could be damaging. It could be damaging, and we can't blame anyone for the economics that they're choosing to buy from. All right. So actually, at the end of the day, the consumer will go to wherever the price is right, and we can't really expect them all to go like, oh my God, I feel bad about this, so I need to do that. But there is this awareness that's coming now as well in terms of where things are manufactured. I mean, the one industry that I'm particularly disappointed in, and I will say disappointed, is fast fashion. Not all providers, but we do see very large fast fashion providers sending goods in from very low wage and alleged forced labor nations. I want to be very clear on this as well. This is fresh material. It's like virgin cotton, a lot of it's plastic as well, polyester, which is not great. And it's flown in, and I've no issue with flying things in. Again, the aviation industry is investing ridiculously large sums of money, and rightfully so, in sustainable fuel. They're all looking for ways to reduce things, but fast fashion in particular is very, very damaging for the environment. Whereas if you look at countries that are actually producing these goods, there isn't really much around how can we make this sustainable, right? The new world will have to think more about this. We'll think more about reusing things. I mean, there's some great platforms like Vinted and even the classics like eBay, where they offer people the option to buy and sell used items or items you've only worn a couple of times. So I think we're beginning to see the green shoots of real sustainability coming through. I don't think enough has been done yet to really educate the consumers and to give the options. And again, I'm going to come back to that thing that I was talking about a minute ago about trade and making it fair for everyone. Now, I see some very, very good manufacturers and producers in Europe, in Italy, in Turkey, and they're using really good sustainable materials and fair labor, charged VAT and duty. but they are so much more expensive than offshore produce being moved in, and it comes in under de minimis fees. And I personally think that while we do not really want to mess with free markets too much, I do think the time has now come that we need to start saying, look, we're in supply chain and we all have a responsibility here. Absolutely, we all have a responsibility. And we should be looking for forced labor and modern slaves in the supply chain. And at the rate that we're seeing goods coming into Europe and North America, knowing what it really costs to deliver and handle these things, someone's losing money. And it's either investors, company owners, or heaven forbid, forced labor. So I do think we are at that point now that we have the technology and we need to start using it. We shouldn't be pushing prices up, but we should be making it a fair market economy. So to go back to answer your question, do I think that we are seeing it? Yes, we are. But I also think that people will normally go to where it's most economically viable. And actually, if we're really going to make things sustainable, we don't have to make it more expensive. What we actually have to do is define the rules that we're all going to play by and then make everyone abide by those rules. And one thing which I've been thinking about for a little while, and I would like to see, is an absolute requirement for all retailers and all producers of goods who sell to consumers in the UK, the USA, Europe, and anywhere really, to actually share with those consumers where those goods were made from. And I think that should be an absolute legal requirement on every website, everywhere, right? And that would then help out the supply chain organizations so they know that they're buying from sustainable sources. You can run regular audits. It's a big job. And I'm sure a lot of people hear me go, oh yeah, but the problem is, no. If we're really going to tackle the environmental issues, we need to be tackling a lot more as well. We need to settle the economics, play by the same rules, and we need to make sure that we're knowing exactly where these goods are being made, who they're being made by, and were the right taxes and duties collected, and did everyone in that supply chain earn a fair wage? Because right now, they're not. And that's where we really need to focus. We get that. And we also think about where things are produced, particularly food. Shorten your supply chain. Go to your farm shop, grow stuff in your own garden. When you go to the grocers, look for things that were produced in your own country. And after living in the Middle East, I actually noticed there that the best produce, the nicest things to eat, were the ones that are actually grown right there in the UAE or countries nearby. It was really good, actually. And the stuff that looked or was perceived to be better wasn't. It'd been flown in and it was really expensive. It wasn't worth it. I had a much better product that was grown near to where I was. So, I think there's a lot that we could all do. And ultimately, if we are going to solve this issue, we've all got to play by the same rules.
Yeah, there are things that big corporations can do, and then supply chain and that, but there are a lot what consumers can do by themselves. You already touched those points. That is a conscious or conscious buying or consumption. One example also from the last mile delivery. The industry has been trying to improve the quality of returns for the last few years. And now we're actually facing the problem that people are ordering 5 pieces of goods and they are returning 4 of them. What means that basically the transportation, useless transportation cost is rising, and this is nothing, not for anybody's good. So being responsible also in your buying or consumption habits, not returning, trying to make the decisions, buying decisions more wisely is also a good thing.
I completely concur, Andre. And look, when people are buying multiple items, the question is why? And I know there's little surveys that go out, but really, I'm not speaking for everyone here, but the reason is number one, do I actually like this? And you don't know until you're wearing it. So I think there is this, will this look good? And is it what I want? And to a degree, I don't think we can really get away from that. But the second thing, and I've seen this particularly with certain kinds of fashion, it's sizing. So there is a difference between different brands, and some brands use their own sizing metrics. And ultimately, if you are a large sweatshirt and it says it's 48 inches across the chest. Make it 48 inches. There needs to be something that actually says, if you say it's this size, it has to be that size. Because then if people can be assured of the style sizing, I mean, I get the style and fit might be a bit different, there's different styles. Yeah, I get it. But ultimately, it is too varied at the minute. So actually, if we really want to reduce that, because again, it's not necessarily about the movement as much as the product that had to be manufactured and brought in. The movement's the movement. And I do think there is this misunderstanding there that in the whole supply chain, when we look at the logistics within the supply chain and we look at the final mile, I think everyone will naturally go, but it's return logistics. That's where all the cost is. And it's not. The vehicle's going anywhere. And especially when you look at PUDO options, locker boxes, store drop off, that's great because you consolidate everything and it's less stops, it's less fuel, it's less gasoline. The problem comes with buying 4 or 5 different pairs of denim jeans when actually you only need one. That's where the real impact is. And it's not just environmental, it hits the finances as well.
Exactly. But listen, James, we have been talking about serious things, supply chain, aviation, M&Ms, but I know one secret. And the secret is that you have one more passion, and this is neuroscience.
Yeah.
And you are trying to make neuroscience tied to supply chain. For me, at first, this is quite an impossible combination, but could you please elaborate a little bit?
Sure. Okay. And thank you for that. Yeah. I mean, your brain on supply chain. So I've become fascinated with neuroscience over the past few years. It's interesting how we think and the environment that we're in. There's 2 parts to this. I think there's what's happening, which is the second part, but then there's actually how the brain works. And in the first instance, the brain has feel good chemicals and feel bad chemicals. So actually, we feel good when we see something that we like, and that's called dopamine. But then if we feel bad, we create anxiety, we have cortisol. Cortisol is a stress chemical, stress hormone. And it's best described as when people have had a really bad night's sleep because something's on their mind and they wake up feeling worse than when they went to bed. That's cortisol moving through the body, and it actually stops the different layers of sleep. But then we also have oxytocin, and oxytocin is released when we're satisfied and we find trust in that process. So dopamine would lead to oxytocin. Now, when we look at supply chains, it's interesting because you can see this now with some, and I'm going to think about consumers for a second here. A consumer that is connected gets continual hits of dopamine. So actually, normally, if you buy something, I've bought it, and it's in a black hole, and the worst experience is I've bought something, did my payment go through? And then maybe a few days later, something appears completely untracked. Not a good experience, not a high level of oxytocin. Did I see something I like? Yes. Did I go through a painless checkout? Yes. Dopamine. I've now got an email telling me that it will be dispatched soon. I now have a dispatch notification. I have a tracking number, and I get a text message to say your parcel's on its way. And then on the day I have, here's your driver, and you can follow your driver, and you are delivery 10 out of 40, and it will be there between these hours. And that's gradually. Now, while that sounds very, very clever, actually what's happening is the brain is getting a constant hit of dopamine. So you become more trusting of that whole experience. And when it's delivered, satisfaction. So that's where neuroscience comes in. That's from a consumer level. But for supply chain managers, you got people who are, moving huge quantities of goods from other countries. So do I know that my stuff has now been boxed correctly? Has it gone through the quality control in the manufacturing nation? Did it clear customs? Is it on the vessel? Is that boat now in a typhoon, but it's delayed 2 days? That's okay because the boat's here. These are things that, commercially, it doesn't just have to be the consumer experience. It's in what we do at work, right? And probably the best thing I think that we all do where we get this neuroscience plays into what we're doing, is the flight tracking apps. I'm sure you've done it. We've all done it. You can track a flight to see someone who's coming in. You know, if you get clever, you can even see the plane that's coming to pick you up. There's apps that do that. And if you're super smart, you'd probably even work out which parcel carrier jet it's on. I've had stuff from America recently and thought, I'm fairly certain it's on that one. And again, you're connected. And you see, as we're talking, we're both smiling. So it's neuroscience in play. But I also want to just touch on that while that's positive, what I'm actually trying to do with neuroscience here is think about how we all interact as humans there. And what's happening today, there is a phenomenon known as ADT, attention deficit traits. So it's not a disorder. There are some people out there who unfortunately do have attention deficit disorder, and they may not know they have it for many years. But attention deficit traits are where we have too much information coming at us. So, and we've all done this, you know, we've missed a meeting, we're wired on coffee, I'm on the phone to someone, emails are coming in, we've got email overload. We have so much information that we're swimming in. We almost behave like we have attention deficit disorder, but we don't. It's just the environment. So I think actually now understanding how we as human beings think and applying that to the supply chain, to the consumer experience, and to our own working lives, we can actually begin to change, really change supply chains and culture, especially at work, and how we consume things for the better. And I'm, clearly my whole life is based on supply chain and aviation, but I actually feel that if we get this right, we can do a lot of good in a lot of places and really connect a lot of people in ways that we hadn't previously thought about. It's nuts to sort of say supply chain could solve all our issues, but realistically it could, But again, all of that leads into how we communicate with each other and how we set ourselves up. So I've got a particular way of working in terms of communication. You wouldn't know it from this podcast. I love to go off on a tangent, but actually at work, I'm a lot more precise.
Yeah, I don't even pretend that I understood everything that you said now, but we are going to put links down below
Sure.
of that video to your materials where you explain it much more. But James, we have to start wrapping up this discussion, although we can talk hours and hours. Extremely versatile experience from different areas, different regions. Let's pretend that I'm 20-year-old person who is picking up the industry or the region where to be active. What is your suggestion? Whether to go to aviation, supply chains, neuroscience, or Latin America?
All of the above. I think if I was talking to or when I do get the chance to talk to 20-year-olds today, I think the answer to that question is incredibly personal. And actually, I think the first thing is to say to them, you've got a long road ahead of you and it can be a great one. So actually, if you're coming into supply chain, fantastic. If you want to go into aviation, great. I think the three really big bits of advice that I would always give anyone that age would be: the first one is learn the terms correctly. All right. If you're going to go and do something, do it properly and learn the terminology correctly. People refer to supply chain and logistics as the same, and they're not. They're two very distinct fields, and you can find that on my LinkedIn. We talk about it a lot. One of the ones that, and it drives me crackers, is people go, oh yeah, I'm in private equity. They're not. Private equity companies are different to using your own money for investments. And, we have to explain. There are even people that have businesses that invest in real estate and go, I'm private equity. They're not. Private equity is, go and look at BlackRock and companies like they're private equity. And then the third thing that I always say to anyone that age is, having traveled all over the world, and this is a good brown M&M for those that want to go into an international career, never, ever, ever eat food in a country where they don't have a word for that food in your own language. If you can't translate it, don't eat it. And I think genuinely that's actually that's worked very well for me. But those are the three things that I would always say to them, you know.
This was really good, the practical advice to end the meeting with you, and I really thank you, James, for the time being here. It was really fascinating talking to you, and I hope somebody will get inspired and follows you, whether in LinkedIn or in life.
Absolutely. You know, and Andre, thank you so much for having me on as well. I think the work that you guys are doing is great. You know, I definitely look forward to you and me meeting up again. And look, I know you'll have the link to the resources, the communication principles, and the neuroscience paper, which I'm releasing soon. And then maybe what we can do following this is when I actually have the next article coming out, we can talk about that first and maybe get some content from your listeners.
Absolutely. So thank you, James, and have a nice evening.
You too, Andre. Have a great weekend.